Hey guys, Pete Weintraub here. Welcome, permanent weight loss community members. And guys, if you're new to this, then this is something we're going to be doing every Thursday. So I'm located in New York on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. So every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, we're going to go over a different topic of the week. Often it's going to be consistent with your questions about how I can support you from a health, fitness, nutrition perspective. But today we're going to talk a little bit about something that I want to riff on. In fact, I just sent an email out to the email list about this, but we're going to go into that in a little more detail today. So yesterday I saw on YouTube, I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast. In my opinion, that's one of the best podcasts ever, if not the best podcast ever. And the reason for it is Joe Rogan, for those of you who don't know he was the host of Fear Factor when it was on television. He's a UFC fight commentator, and obviously he also does this podcast, has several sponsors, gets millions of downloads a month, and it's very, very popular. But he has a lot of different people on. He has political figures, he has comedians like himself, he has fighters, and he has scientists and different people through all these different areas. He just had a guy on who is a scientist and he deals with psychedelics, which is pretty cool. So he has a very wide range of people. And yesterday I noticed that he did a podcast episode earlier this week with a guy named Chris Kresser. And he'd been on the podcast maybe a year ago, maybe it was sooner than that. But he's just releasing a new book, and it's very similar to a book that was released over this past summer by Dr. William Davis, MD. He wrote the Wheat Belly series of books. He just came out with a new book called Undoctored, and Chris Kresser is releasing a similar book, similar topics, and the podcast is a 3+ hour. It's not really an interview. Joe is very good at having a conversation with a lot of these people, letting them talk about whatever it is that they specialize in. But he had Chris Kresser on, and Chris was discussing functional medicine and kind of how he believes through his research how the medical community can change. And one thing that he mentioned, which I found fascinating, was that it's all about gut health. I mean, it's not all about gut health, but our guts have a lot to do with our health. If our guts are not functioning optimally, there's a lot of different gut flora and little, I'm not really all that familiar with what goes on in there, but I know that it's crucially important. And for a lot of people in this country, and he brought up a lot of CDC, Center for Disease Control statistics, so I'm going to share some of these with you, and it's fascinating. This is more so for the United States, but there is an obesity epidemic the world over, and it's something that I definitely think we should all be cognizant of. So you can see that up here on the screen now. I'm going to take you through this. So chronic diseases, the leading causes of death and disability in the United States. So first of all, with a chronic condition, chronic diseases and conditions, examples of chronic diseases and conditions are things like heart disease, stroke, cancer, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and arthritis. And those are some of the most common, costly, and preventable of all the major health problems. I'm just going to read through these statistics because it's absolutely terrible. So as of 2012, about half of all adults, so about 117 million people in the United States, had one or more chronic health conditions. 1 in 4 adults had 2 or more chronic health conditions. 7 of the top 10 causes of death in 2014 were chronic diseases. 2 of these chronic diseases, heart disease and cancer, together accounted for nearly 46%, so nearly half of all deaths were a result of chronic diseases involving heart disease and cancer. Obesity is a serious health concern. Obviously, that's why a lot of us are here in the permanent weight loss community. And between 2011 and 2014, more than 1/3 of adults, or about 84 million people, were obese as defined by the body mass index. And on Joe Rogan's podcast, and in a lot of ways, I'm going to transition back to me now. So on Joe Rogan's podcast, and in a lot of ways, I'm not a huge fan of how they calculate obesity or being overweight. Reason being is they use something called BMI, or body mass index. According to that, I'm obese. I know Joe Rogan he's 5'8", 200 pounds, but he's a stocky, muscular guy. And there's a lot of people like that, professional athletes. If you look at their height and weight, they're going to appear to be obese, but they're really not. So it's not always the most accurate measure, but Chris Kresser is able to defend this on the podcast. So I highly recommend just go to YouTube, type in Joe Rogan, Chris Kresser. Kresser is Kresser, and look up the most recent podcast episode that he did with him. It should have been in the last couple of days. Today is November 9th, 2017, in case you're seeing this further into the future. And he said that even though, yes, there are outliers, like I would be an outlier, Joe Rogan would be an outlier, a lot of professional athletes, because of their muscle mass in proportion to their height and the average person, are outliers. The standard deviation wouldn't be more than 1 to 2%. So meaning, if there's 40% of people in the United States, and this was recently, this is not in the CDC statistics I just showed you, 40% of Americans are obese, not overweight, but obese. And he said the standard deviation accounting for these outliers is estimated to be between 1 and 2%, meaning that, yes, 1 to 2% of the 40% of people who are considered obese by the body measurement index ratings, they may be obese, but only 1 to 2% of that population would be considered outliers, meaning that 38 to 40% of United States Americans are obese. And look, if you're here in America, or even if you're not here in America, if you're from the United Kingdom, if you're from New Zealand or Australia or Canada or South Africa, any English-speaking place in the world, you'll find if you just walk around, go to the grocery store, go to a very public place, go to the airport. I'm going to be going to the airport tomorrow. You're going to see a lot of people who aren't just a little tubby, but they're very, very overweight. So this is a prevalent issue, and unfortunately, like this shows, and I'm sure the statistic is pretty common in other parts of the industrialized world, 1 in 2 Americans have at least one chronic condition, and 1 in 4 have 2 or more. That's crazy. And a lot of that has to do with our gut health and going about things through functional medicine, which is instead of going to a specialist who will give you a pill or a prescription to kind of mask the symptoms, they actually identify the root cause, and often the root cause can be attributed to your gut health. There is a great book by Dr. David Perlmutter. He wrote the book Grain Brain and then Brain Maker about the importance of feeding your intestinal flora and keeping that area healthy. But it's crucially important. So today what I want to do for you guys is give you a few examples of what you can do to improve your gut health. So number 1, you need to eat more probiotic green foods. So probiotic foods often are fermented. So if you like kimchi, if you like sauerkraut, things like that, things that are fermented, kefir, some forms of yogurt, just be careful with the sugar content in the yogurt. But if you eat stuff like that, you'll be able to acclimate your gut to become healthier. From the greens perspective, dark leafy greens, spinach, arugula, asparagus, those are all great things that you can have. I have a full list. I'm going to be posting the post that I sent out to my email list to you guys here in the permanent weight loss community. So you're going to have a more extensive list, but just think dark leafy green vegetables and you're going to be pretty well off. If you're like me though, and you're not a fan of dark leafy green vegetables, then I would definitely recommend getting a green supplement, and preferably one that has probiotics in it as well. I personally recommend Athletic Greens. I'm going to attach a link in the comments below when we're done. So if you're like me, or you can't easily access dark leafy greens, or you don't like eating them, then a greens drink might be good for you. All you gotta do is have 8 ounces of water, put a scoop or 2 in, depending on which greens supplement you get. Just mix it up, and you'll be good to go. So that's number 1. Number 2, you need to remove toxins from your diet. So obviously alcohol is a toxin. Any form of alcohol is a toxin. So there are better alcoholic beverages you can have, like my favorite 3, the trio of terror, tequila, gin, and dry red wine. And while yes, wine and even beer to an extent has been linked to have health benefits if you have 1 or 2 glasses per day or per night, whatever the case may be. I wouldn't recommend drinking that stuff every single day because 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3. Next thing you know, you're in an alley naked and vomiting. You don't want to do that. So definitely minimize the amount that you drink in terms of alcohol. And then in a lot of processed foods, you want to shop the periphery of the grocery store, right? You want to go to the produce section on one side of the store. You want to go to the meat and fish section on another side of the store. Obviously, you can pick up some water and different things that are in bottles and cases and boxes. But for the most part, if you go to the interior aisles, there's a lot of processed foods. Processed foods tend to be loaded with artificial colors, artificial preservatives, artificial sweeteners. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a bunch of crap in there that is toxic to our bodies, that's untested, that is terrible for us. Trans fat is in there as well, a lot of, omega-6 rich oils, and when things are cooked in omega-6 fats and they're heated, those things have very low hydrogenation and boiling points. So it's very easy for manufacturers, even if they're following all the protocol outlined by the industry or by the government, it's very easy to overheat these foods. As a result, cause a hydrogenation, it becomes trans fat. So you throw that in there with the artificial colorings, preservatives, and sweeteners, you're not doing your gut, you're not doing your body any good. So a diet rich and real, whole, and preferably if you can afford it, or whatever, organic foods. And what are some good high quality things? Well, in the description, if you're part of the permanent weight loss community, if that's how you're watching this video, in the description I have a link to download both my food guide and healthy recipe book. Both of those things are going to help you understand what good quality nutrition is, what a diverse range of nutrition is, and also obviously give you 72 different recipes that will enable you to kind of have your cake and eat it too with some healthier ingredients. If you're not a member of the permanent weight loss community and you're either listening to this through the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud, or you're watching on YouTube, excuse me, I'm going to provide some links down below so you can purchase the food guide and recipe book so you can get more information on that. But basically, from a quality perspective, there are some things that you want to include. You want some organic meats. You want some organic non-starchy veggies. You want some organic raw nuts and seeds. You want some organic low glycemic fruits. You want to minimize your starch to half a cup or less. And if you're going to eat starch, you want it to be a vegetable-based starch. So potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, corn, beans. That's where you want to get your starch from, and in half a cup or less. You don't want to eat grain-based starches because grain-based starches have absolutely no nutritional value. When something has to be fortified with vitamins and minerals, then that just shows you that the foodstuff as it was prior to the fortification process is not good for you and thus is not worth your money or your time ingesting it. It's going to do you absolutely no good. So stick with vegetable-based starches when you eat them. And then lastly, no added sugar. So don't eat any of the sugar that's not already coming in your non-starchy veggies and low glycemic fruits or your starches. All right? Apply that sentence to every dietary decision you make. You're going to be fine. It's very, very, very simple. All right? So that is a sentence that you want to include in that respect. All right? So that is good quality nutrition. Again, if you're part of the permanent weight loss community, you can get more information in the food guide and recipe book. Links are attached here. If you're not in the permanent weight loss community and you're either listening or watching somewhere else, you can purchase the food guide and recipe book by following the links in the description. All right? So that is number 2. And then lastly, number 3, you want to manage your stress. A lot of people are dumbfounded when they hear this, when they think of a physical issue like a chronic condition that's often caused by inferior gut health. They're going to think, oh, then it's all physical. No, it's mental too. Our gut health has been linked too. So if you're prone to anxiety, depression, things like that, often your gut health has a lot to do with what's going on upstairs. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes the way that your hormones are regulated throughout your body. It changes how your different body's systems function, whether they're optimally functioning or not optimally functioning. So you need to manage stress. So there's 3 things that I recommend you do in order to manage stress. Number 1, I recommend you get more sleep, because if we're not well rested, if we're not getting either 7.5 or 9 hours of sleep a night, there are some outliers who can do 6 hours of sleep or less a night and be perfectly fine, but those are outliers. Just like we showed earlier with the BMI rankings for obesity in the United States and around the world. They're not that accurate for everybody, but I'm an outlier, and a lot of people who are more muscled than the average person at that height and weight, those are outliers. The same holds true here. All right. So most people need between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep. Please try and sleep in 90-minute intervals. Be in bed half an hour before you're supposed to be asleep, starting from that cycle. So if you're aiming for 9 hours, be in bed 9.5 hours prior to when you want to wake up. If you're trying to aim for 7.5, be in bed 8 hours prior to when you're supposed to wake up. That way, you're more well rested. You're not insulin resistant, which you can be just by one bad night's sleep. So sleep is crucially important, and then that obviously affects your decision making. You're more susceptible to wanting and eating crappy, sugary foodstuffs. Your moods are going to be much more unregulated. You're going to be up and down quite a bit more, and obviously your energy levels. And that's why you're going to feel the need and desire to eat more, regardless of the result. The second thing you're going to want to do is exercise regularly. Exercise releases dopamine from our brains. This is considered the pleasure hormone. And if you're stressed out, and when I've been stressed out in the past, like if I have a lot on my mind, I'll go for a jog or a run when it's nice out. Obviously, it's getting a little cold here in New York, but I'll go for a jog, and that'll really help me kind of work through. It's almost like a moving form of meditation. Yoga is great for that. And if you're like angry if someone or something in your life is pissing you off, in my opinion, nothing beats a weightlifting session where you just kill the weights, really push your limits, and that'll help calm you down, help you think a little more clearly, and get all the aggression and anger out of your system. So exercising regularly, obviously exercise too, while it can help expedite the process on your weight loss journey, there's actually a paradigm also offered by Chris Kresser, who's the guy on the Joe Rogan podcast that gave me this whole idea for today's segment. And he said that of the 3 physical things, so that includes nutrition, sleep, and fitness, sleep is actually number 2. Fitness is number 3. Fitness does have a lot of health benefits, but when it comes to losing weight, when it comes to improving health, if you're not sleeping well and you're eating like shit, that's really not going to help you all that much, the exercise. Exercise is just a nice supplemental thing to help improve your health, your body's functionality, and so on. All right, and then lastly, meditation. So this is something that I picked up a couple of years ago. I've struggled with anxiety and depression for much of my life. I feel that I've gotten much of that under control. I'm able to see things more clearly, more rationally. And yeah, I get anxious from time to time, just like the next person. But because through the art of meditation and the act of meditating on a regular basis, I've learned how to quiet my mind, focus on one issue at a time, and look at that as an opportunity instead of as a trial. Like obviously, tough things are going to happen in your life. It's inevitable. But when you learn how to manage your stress and how to approach problems from a different perspective and look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow as a human being, it really does help. So I hope you found this helpful. So again, I'm going to post a link in the comments below here on Facebook if you're part of the permanent weight loss community. And we're going to and that's going to lead you to the green supplement. If you're not a fan of eating dark leafy greens or probiotics, I have a great supplement that you can take in that regard. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on SoundCloud or iTunes, I'm going to include links to my food guide, my recipe book, and the green supplement so you have access to all that. For that, I'm Pete Weintraub, permanent weight loss specialist. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next week during the weekly Facebook Live. Have a good one.